Is emptied of fighters and civilians, jeered by Assad's forces as they go. Is this what the world has in mind for Aleppo? Good evening. It is so close to Damascus, it's almost a suburb. But Daraya saw some of the first anti-Assad protests at the start of the war, and for 4 years now, the people inside have been under siege and under attack from government forces supported by Russian air power. Today, the evacuation began of civilians, and rebel fighters are being taken to their stronghold of Idlib. So is it an act of humanity or of ethnic cleansing? In Aleppo, they are watching with a mixture of relief and horror.
Also tonight, the Italian Prime Minister has declared a national day of mourning and a state of emergency in the central Italian earthquake zone, as the toll there has risen to 268. Amongst the dead, 3 British tourists, including a 14-year-old boy and a couple from North London. And we find out what it's like to lose your home to the quake without even finding a tent to replace it. What price medical negligence? In a very rare case for Britain, an optometrist has been given a 2-year sentence, suspended sentence, for failing to spot a tumour in an 8-year-old boy 5 months before he died. Is there a growing trend to put doctors on trial, and should there be? And the Burkini ban in France has been suspended for now by the country's highest court amid a welter of criticism that it was racist and inflammatory. What hasn't been resolved is the toxic rift at the heart of French society.
And a new furious attack from Hillary Clinton on Donald Trump and his new best friend. Nigel Farage basks in the glory of the American right. We talked to one of the people who wants his old job running UKIP. Clinton says Trump is boosted by the alt-right, an alarming combination of populism with extremists and racists. Does the alt-right really exist? What is it? Besieged for more than 4 years with just a single aid shipment allowed in, residents and rebel troops are finally leaving the Syrian town of Daraya after one of the longest standoffs during the civil war. The first buses began evacuating people through the rubble-strewn streets, some of them children too young to remember life before the siege. Daraya, just outside Damascus, has been a focus of protests against the Assad regime. It's now the scene of rebel surrender. Our chief correspondent, Alex Thompson, reports.
It is over. 4 years, probably the most intense urban bombardment anywhere in the world this century, let alone anywhere in Syria. Daraya has fallen to the regime. In that time, much of Daraya has fallen to the ground. Day after week after year, the crude barrel bombs descended from Assad's helicopters. Today, the guns at last silent. They waited in anticipation amongst the rubble. Civilians first, and then like something from another planet. Spanking new air-conditioned buses laid on by the Assad regime to take out 4,000 civilians. All of this overseen by the Red Crescent and the UN. So 4 years of blood, horror, near starvation, and now the humiliation. Their coaches had to run the gauntlet of President Assad's soldiers, chanting, "We give our blood and souls for Syria." A Syrian army officer who declined to be named declared it a victory for Damascus.
As a result of a fully studied military plan, we surrounded the militants in no more than 1 square kilometers inside Daraya. Because of this, they preferred to surrender because they were aware of their destiny, to be killed or to surrender.
The rebels insist this is no surrender, just a move to protect civilians who they say cannot live any longer in a place like this. But the fact is, these skeletal acres of concrete and twisted metal are now firmly in government hands. Once 250,000 people lived in this rubblescape, all of it just 4 miles from Damascus. Daraya back in 2011, and vast street protests begin against the regime. Funerals would become huge demonstrations. Truly, this place was a crucible of the uprising against Assad, a birthplace of the revolution. President Assad's army and militia responded in typical fashion. In August 2012, his forces killed hundreds of people here, men, women and children, in a series of massacres. Daraya, though, would fight on and on. Rebels would say it would become the graveyard for Assad's tanks and ground forces, and would put out videos to support that. It was brutal, close-quarters stuff. Rebels often fighting within yards of tanks. In reply, the gun barrels would pummel, apparently indiscriminately, across the ground here. Whilst from the air, the town became synonymous with crude barrel bombs dropped from helicopters month after month. Somehow, in silent streets devoid of cars, children would still dawdle to makeshift schools in underground shelters, or seek food for livestock as the years of siege tightened. And today, in what feels like a different universe, Geneva, the US and Russian foreign ministers Kerry and Lavrov head up the latest talks to try somehow and find the beginning of a real end to the Syrian war. But on the ground in Syria, they just continue to die on all sides. Another barrel bomb detonates in Aleppo, where a ceasefire deal to deliver aid has yet to stick on the ground. Whilst in Daraya today, they cry, forced to leave what may be a pulverized place but is still home, and leave for who knows what to come. And for Damascus and allies in Moscow and Tehran, the question, why pursue a ceasefire if you are winning on the ground?
Well, earlier on a pretty poor internet line, I managed to speak to Hamza, one of the few doctors still working in the besieged city of Aleppo. And I asked him, when he looked at what was happening in Daraya, what did he think where he was sitting?
We have mixed feeling about what's happening in Daraya. Of course, I'm happy for the women and children and the people inside of Daraya that have been besieged for almost four years. But on the other hand, I feel desperate that seeing that example happening in Daraya would take place inside of Aleppo city. That we maybe be besieged for a long time, that all of the bakeries and the hospitals will be destroyed, same as what happened in Daraya, and no one will take action toward that. It makes you feel desperate that we are alone in this crisis.
Do you fear that in the same way that people have been basically driven out of Daraya, Aleppo will also be emptied of all the people like you?
I hope not, but that's exactly the example that the regime and the Russian and Iranians are giving us. Unfortunately, we don't have any hope. We don't have any hope from the United Nations or the Security Council. Our only hope is the fighters who are protecting the civilians inside of the city. That's the only hope that we have.
Over the last couple of months, we've broadcast some very shocking pictures from the hospital where you work. Is all of that still happening every day?
Of course, it's still happening every day, all the time. Any time of the day, we are expecting a massacre to take place, and we are expecting injured people to come to the hospital. And we are expecting at the same time that the hospital would be targeted at any moment. Actually, we are living in fear inside of Aleppo city, and the fear becomes greater when we are in the hospital. It's very ironic that when I'm in home, I feel safer than when I'm at the hospital.
Tell me, what has happened today?
Today morning in a neighborhood called Al-Mashhad, a massacre happened at the morning. Many injuries, more than 25 persons have been injured, and 6 persons have been killed during that attacks, and they are all with cluster bombs. I don't know why the Security Council can't see that the Russians are using cluster bombs all the time. I guess the last 7 days, all the attacks that happened inside of Aleppo city are with cluster bombs. And we don't see anyone that trying to take any action toward that.
Some people say, you know, what you're doing is you're supporting Sunni extremism, that you're pumping out propaganda for your side. What do you say in reply to that?
Of course, I'm taking side, and I'm hoping that everyone in the world and for the United Nations and the Security Council to take sides of those civilians who are only their only demand is to have the free will to choose their destiny. That's what we only want, and that's our only demand.
Dr. Hamza Khatib talking to me from Aleppo. Matt.
Flags flew at half-mast across Italy today as the country declared a day of national mourning and a state of emergency after Wednesday's earthquake. Hopes are now fading of finding any more survivors. 268 people are known to have died, including 3 Britons, one of them a teenage boy. Marcus Burnett, aged 14, and Will and Maria Henniker-Gottlieb, all from North London, were staying in the same property in Samati, just outside Amatrice, when the quake hit. Teams are still searching the rubble across the town, along with nearby Accumuli, Aquata and Pescara del Tronto. Well, as ever, our reporter Kieran Jenkins is there. Kieran, over to you.
It didn't seem possible, Matt, that things could get worse here in Amatrice, but with each aftershock, more and more of this town falls away. Bridges are buckling, roads are becoming blocked, including both roads into Samati, which is where it's been confirmed today that 3 Britons have lost their lives. They were staying, as you say, in the same building, 2 families. In one family who owned a property there, 2 children lost their parents. In the other family, a married couple, lost their little boy. Beyond the gates, the grand facade is still standing, but the building it belongs to is gone. In this single spot, 2 families torn apart. In one apartment, Londoners Will Henniker-Gottlieb and his wife Maria were killed. Their 2 children survived. In another apartment, 14-year-old Marcus Burnett lost his life. His parents made it out alive. They'd been treated in a hospital nearby. The Henniker-Gottlieb family were well known, well liked here, spent their summers in Samati, where now the streets are thick with dust. Rescuers busy with grim tasks.
Io personalmente ho contribuito al recupero dei...
Daniele Federigo says he pulled out 6 people in Samati. Only 1 was alive. The Foreign Office has confirmed 3 British deaths tonight. It said the families were grateful to Italian rescuers for their tireless work. In Accumuli, nearby, the rescue is over. 11 people were found dead here. But tremors could still topple these broken buildings. Most of the town is out of bounds. We're going to your home.
Sì.
We go with Leondara, beyond the cordon. Heading home, but only to pack.
Qui, continuando, a destra.
Accumuli is being emptied of life.
Sì, lo vedo che è vuoto.
There's nobody here, she says. It hurts to see it like this.
Qui, questa casa, sì.
This is you?
Questa, sì.
Returning here means reliving a night she'd sooner forget.
Con calma, non c'è fretta.
Keep calm, the fireman says. We're here for you. You get a clear sense here of the sheer force with which this quake struck, the chaos that it brought, and the hurry in which the residents here left. Is this where you were when the earthquake happened?
Sì, eravamo qui, dormivamo qui mia figlia.
I was sleeping here with my daughter, yes. We held on to each other tight because we thought we were going to die. The earthquake was never ending. It went on and on, so we decided to run.
There are hundreds of homeless here, facing nothing but uncertainty. Leon Dara's family spent last night in their car. Today they have to move on. And this is where they come. More than 1,000 are now housed in camps like this, including, from tonight, Leon Dara and her daughter Ilaria. Ilaria, your daughter, she's very upset.
Sì, mia figlia, sì, infatti non riesce.
She's shutting herself away. It seems she fears everything. She keeps asking us to stay close to her.
They've been told they'll spend winter here, on a hillside, in a tent. In Amatrice, the town clock has somehow withstood the violent aftershocks. Other buildings continue to crumble. Rescue, already implausible, is becoming impossible. So many dead, so many to mourn. Well, tomorrow there will be a state funeral for at least 40 of those victims. It's also been declared a national day of mourning. And here in Amatrice, it feels like that's already begun. In many places now, they've already stopped looking, they've stopped searching. 2 hours away in Pescara del Tronto, anyone who can be saved has been saved. Anyone who was still unaccounted for has been pulled out dead. And all the while, the aftershocks keep coming. At around 6 a.m. this morning, we felt one that lasted 5 or 6 seconds. The room shook, the shutters shook, and of course here where buildings are hanging by a thread, that is all the more of a problem. So much has fallen here, so much has been lost, that the mayor has said that this place, Amatrice, should be bulldozed and rebuilt again.
Gosh. Kieran Jenkins, thanks very much indeed. Krish.
Thanks, man. An optometrist has been given a suspended sentence after she failed to spot a tumour behind an 8-year-old boy's eye. Vincent Barker died in July 2012 after developing fluid on his brain. 35-year-old Honey Rose said she had done her best for the child during a routine eye test 5 months earlier, but the court in Ipswich found her guilty of gross negligence manslaughter. In a moment, should medical mistakes be criminalised? First, Paul McNamara reports.
The special little boy who is never coming home. That's how the parents of Vinnie Barker described their 8-year-old son who they loved so much. He was killed by a build-up of liquid behind the eye, a build-up of liquid completely missed by the woman on the left, Honey Rose, his optometrist. Vinnie Barker went to this Boots Opticians in Ipswich in February 2012. This picture of his eye was taken, which his optician never looked at. A key routine examination should have taken place, which never did. And 5 months later, this happy little boy was dead. During last month's trial, Mrs. Rose told the court that she had seen images she was wrongly told belonged to Vinnie. The jury didn't believe her. Their verdict? Guilty of manslaughter by gross negligence. Today, she would find out her fate. Before sentencing today, Mrs. Rose was told of a plea from the Barker family. Spare her jail. Mrs. Rose has 3 children herself, and the Barkers feared what impact prison would have on them. Honey Rose was sentenced to 2 years in prison, but suspended for 2 years, and 200 hours of community service.
Is there anything you'd like to say to the Barker family? The judge said that you tried to cover this up. The judge also said that the family made an application for you not to go to prison. Is there anything you'd like to say to the family? This sentence for manslaughter by gross negligence is the first of its kind for an optometrist. And Mr. Justice Stuart Smith made the point a number of times today that the mistakes made on that day were a tragic one-off for no good reason. But the implications, according to the defence barrister, have sent shockwaves through the industry. Just how can medical professionals go about their work when a single slip could mean facing prison?
The police say that these fears are unfounded, and that this case was unique.
I think it's fair in cases where, as in this case, the standard of the duty of care, the standard of the eye examination in this case, fell far below what you'd expect of a reasonably competent optometrist. We're not talking about somebody that just made a mistake. The mistake she made was so poor, it reached the criminal threshold.
Healthcare workers like Dr. Jenny Vaughan are united in their grief over cases like Vinnie Barker, but fear growing use of the gross negligence manslaughter charge will not make things better. She is one of more than 4,000 signatories of an open letter to the Justice Secretary calling for a review.
The impact of all of these trials is huge. Everybody knows about them. And it's the fear and confusion because actually the distinction between gross negligence manslaughter and what is a medical error is not actually clearly defined. And this means that the normal healthcare worker going in about their daily job can get very fearful that this could happen to them.
There is much uncertainty as to the impact of today's sentencing. The Barker family say one outcome is unchanged: their life sentence of grief.
Well, the doctor who drew up that petition is Dr. David Nicholl, expressing concern over the use of manslaughter charges against individual healthcare workers when things go wrong. And joining me from his home in Hereford is Richard Stanton, whose baby daughter Kate died just 6 hours after she was born. An inquest jury unanimously found her death could have been avoided. Welcome to you both. Let me start with you, Dr. David Nicholl. Why did you draw up this petition?
Well, this particular area, in terms of what happened in this case, a child, I mean, absolutely tragic case, had a misdiagnosis of papilledema, and this is an area that I've worked on for some years, in fact, based on near misses, cock-ups, where things have gone wrong. And I've become quite troubled by this in the sense that we've actually measured this across a number of different hospitals, and we've been using essentially education to try and improve the assessment of patients neurologically. And my worry about a case like this, the kind of studies that I've done, would be next to impossible to do tomorrow, because all the data we used was all completely transparent. We named the hospitals concerned. Even the results were very worrying. And you know, we're trying to use education to improve things. And I've also, you know, seen other cases where the, you know, coroners asked me to review the case, very similar to a case like this.
But in a case like this, why shouldn't doctors be held criminally liable if there is gross manslaughter negligence? I mean, you, after all, your expertise is that you can save lives, but also you can neglect the saving of a life if you're not doing a proper job. Why should you not be held criminally liable?
Well, anyone can make a mistake, and I think we should be learning from others, like the airline industry, and have what is meant to be a true, just culture, so that when errors happen, you report them, and in fact, you become culpable if you don't report them. The NHS is a million miles away from that, and we should be actually talking about errors, trying to learn from them. The actions of this kind of case today are actually going to make it much more difficult. People are going to be less willing to talk about error, and that kind of cover-up isn't healthy in the NHS.
Let's go over to Richard Stanton. First of all, very sorry for your loss, Mr. Stanton. Baby Kate died in 2009, and I gather that you are still looking for justice today. Is that right?
Perhaps not necessarily justice, but some accountability. Kate died in 2009 at the age of 6 hours, and it took us 3.5 years to come to an inquest, a jury-heard inquest, which found Kate's death was also avoidable, and that the Trust, the Royal Shrewsbury and Telford Hospital Trust, directly contributed towards Kate's death. Now, after inquest, we would have expected that the evidence that was uncovered there to be acted upon so that lessons could be learned and that care plans and policy could be altered so that this didn't happen again. But instead of learning, this trust chose, and they did choose, to reject the findings of Kate's inquest. So there was no learning, there was no accountability. As far as they were concerned, there was still nothing to see. So we took our case to the Parliamentary Health Service Ombudsman, and 2 years after they took it on, they returned and upheld our complaint in full and found this trust guilty of maladministration and issued them told them that they had to apologise to us. Now, I hear that very, very clearly the message that there will be a reluctance amongst clinicians and consultants and those that practice in the medical profession to come forward, but if mistakes are made. But that couldn't be further from the truth in the terms of Kate. This trust was afforded every opportunity to tell the truth, and midwives' statements were rewritten. As I say, the Parliamentary Health Service Ombudsman found them guilty of maladministration.
And the point...
And it wasn't until last year when...
Right, go on.
Sorry, Matt.
just finish your point.
And
sorry.
it wasn't until last year when two independent investigations undertaken by NHS England actually forced this trust to look at itself and to look at its policy and to uncover the real truth behind Kate. During that time, there was also a West Mercia police investigation going on that me and my wife Rhiannon had instigated into whether corporate manslaughter or indeed gross negligence manslaughter could be looked at and whether the CPS would bring charges under that.
So basically what Richard is saying there is that the system cannot clean itself up. You've got to go to another level. You've got to go to the criminal level in order to hold individuals accountable for their gross negligence.
I understand, and I'd agree that we're talking about some of the most difficult areas of medicine, and you know, like has just been said, the tragic kind of cases basically. But often, when you look at these kind of errors, it's often system errors that happen. It's very rarely that an individual comes in and causes harm.
But isn't that the easy excuse? It's the system that's to blame and not the individuals, because you're never going to get to the kind of justice that Richard wants.
If you speak to people like Martin Bromley, aircraft pilot whose wife died in surgery, he recognises that he gets this, that actually it's often many factors that are involved in that. And true negligence is not learning from error. All of us can make a mistake.
OK. Richard, does that satisfy you, the answer you just heard from David?
Well, I would totally agree that the true tragedy of anything where somebody has either been harmed or killed by medical negligence is that the learning within the system, within the trust, doesn't go ahead to prevent this kind of thing from ever happening again. But here we had, in terms of Kate's case, yes, we had individual clinicians who failed Kate so woefully, but then we also had a management cover-up that added to that and impounded on mine and Rhiannon's grief at a time that was incredibly difficult for us. And it wasn't until the West Mercia police became involved that truly triggered them to focus a little bit more on themselves. I mean, here we had a trust that had no operational policy for any of its midwife-led units from the time of 2009 up until November of last year, and they would have still had no policy for their operational policy for their ML units had it not been for the intervention of a deeper investigation.
Right, let's just get your reaction to that, David.
Well, it's difficult also when we're talking about different conditions, but I think there are other ways of dealing with this. For example, in New Zealand, different compensation methods that don't have the aggressive, punitive kind of legal system that we have here, which often focuses on an individual and actually don't deal with the system errors.
Okay.
I have to interject that we're not looking for compensation. I think there's this cultural view that somehow that anyone that has been harmed, or a family or a loved one that has had this compounded upon them because they've lost or had a child or a loved one harmed through medical negligence, is looking for compensation.
Very rarely.
We're not. We're looking for learning, and we're looking for the lessons of accountability to bring about learning. And unless we learn from when a tragic event happens, then I'm afraid there's going to be an awful lot more of this happening.
OK, this could go on and on, but I'm afraid we've got to leave it there. Richard Stanton, David Nicholl, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Krish.
The French ban on full-length swimsuits, known as burkinis, has been suspended after a ruling from the country's highest administrative court. Human rights activists argued that the ban in the town of Villeneuve-Loubet contravenes civil liberties. This is just the first step in the process, though. The court will now be given more time to rule on the legality of the whole case in the 15 towns and cities where the ban has been imposed. The issue has opened up divisions among French society and government, as Kamian Zoran reports.
When Siam, a 34-year-old mother of two, was forced by armed police to remove some of her clothes on a French beach this week, were you appalled or did you approve? This afternoon, a French court has unbanned the burkini, the simple piece of swimwear that's become an ideological battleground and a political weapon, as the country is pushed further to the right after 3 terrorist attacks in 18 months. But in the land of liberté, the freedom to wear a burkini, ruled the court, is as sacred as the freedom of speech.
It's against the civil freedom of religion, and now the decision of the Conseil d'État is final, and there is no other appeal, so it will be the last decision in France about this topic, and we can say that it's the end of the arguments, the political arguments about this question of burkini, of banning burkini.
But it's not the end. The Burkini is an easy target for the former French President Nicolas Sarkozy, a conservative who's campaigning for another tilt at the top job. But he's losing ground to the Front National. Elections are next year, and he can smell the populist appeal of a ban.
I ask for a law forbidding it on the entire territory of the Republic.
After today's verdict, Sarkozy's party said they'd go to the French Parliament to enshrine a ban in law. And in Corsica, where there have been fights on the beach about burkinis, one mayor insisted the ban in his town would stay. But aside from the politics, there's the practicalities. What does prohibiting an all-in-one beach garment, favoured by some Muslim women, actually achieve? Does it help France with integration, or reduce the chance of another terrorist attack, or just make the beach another place where French Muslims, especially women, feel unwelcome? The Burkini ban, says France's Moroccan-born education minister, has simply unleashed racism.
It poses a question to our individual liberties. When you reach the point, you check whether clothing conforms.
To be French, a French woman, a French Muslim woman on a beach. Who is to say what she is or is not allowed to wear? Tonight, in the eyes of the law at least, it is clear. She decides, and she alone.
Hillary Clinton, no less, has accused the former UKIP leader Nigel Farage of stoking up a rising tide of hardline right-wing nationalism and whipping up anti-immigrant sentiment to win the Brexit vote. Mr. Farage was campaigning with Donald Trump in Mississippi, and we'll have more on the US contest in a moment. But closer to home, whatever has become of UKIP, embroiled in leadership squabbles and petty infighting, despite pulling off the political shock of a generation? Here's Fatima Manju.
Romford is Brexit land. 70% of people here voted to leave. In the 2015 elections, UKIP came second, increasing their vote share by 18%. But where will these voters head now?
With Britain set to leave the European Union and the Prime Minister herself having declared Brexit means Brexit, many will ask just what is the point of UKIP? And beyond that, if it's to survive, how will it do so without the personality of Nigel Farage?
We spoke to Leave voters. None of them could name a single candidate currently running for UKIP leader.
I think they've done what they said they were going to do, and they've changed the whole system.
You mean to get us out of the European Union?
Absolutely, quicker the better.
What do you think of UKIP?
I like him.
Who's him?
UKIP, politician.
Do you know any of the candidates?
Not really. I've seen some on the telly, but I didn't recognise any of them.
And, I mean, you voted out.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Now that we are going to be out, do you think there's any point for UKIP to exist then?
Not really.
Well, I suppose they could be useful because they might be a reasonable opposition. I don't think Labour's doing anything much.
They'll make policies that they don't keep. Do you know what I mean? They say we're going to do this, that. It never changes.
They're all out to line their own pockets.
What? Sorry? UKIP. What do you think
What's
of UKIP?
that?
The political party, the UK Independence Party?
I ain't got a clue what
No,
it is.
never heard of them.
No.
So here's the lineup. Bill Etheridge, Philip Broughton, Liz Jones, Lisa Duffy, and the empty chair is for Diane James, the favourite, who says there's no need for her to debate the others. Meanwhile, Mr Farage has been busy campaigning for Donald Trump.
And we did it. We made June the 23rd our Independence Day when we smashed the establishment.
And incurring the ire of Hillary Clinton.
One of Britain's most prominent right-wing leaders, a man named Nigel Farage, who stoked anti-immigrant sentiments to win the referendum.
Whoever follows in Mr Farage's footsteps will need to think carefully about the party's direction, how to keep current UKIP voters and attract new ones.
I think UKIP will increasingly come under pressure from Theresa May and the new Conservative government, who are talking about things that UKIP voters like. Grammar schools, Brexit means Brexit, let's restrict free movement. So if Theresa May really does a pincer movement there on the UKIP electorate, that's really going to leave the Labour areas, where of course under a possibly re-elected Jeremy Corbyn, the Labour Party is really going to struggle, I think. So we may actually see the Farage successor perhaps conclude that there's more potential for UKIP in the north than there is in the south.
And there's a further threat. Some UKIP backers, even the party's most influential donor, have talked of setting up a new political movement. UKIP's next leader will need to convince supporters the party isn't a spent force.
And we're joined now by one of the UKIP leadership candidates, Linda Duffy.
Lisa.
What's UKIP for?
UKIP
Lisa,
is...
I beg your pardon.
That's
sorry.
okay.
Wrong on autocue and I just read it. Very sorry.
That's okay. UKIP is more relevant now, I believe, than it's ever been. We have achieved so much with so little. We forced David Cameron into giving us a referendum, and we've really worked hard and we've achieved a great Brexit result, but we haven't quite got Brexit yet. So UKIP must keep that pressure on. There's 17.4 million people really waiting for us to make sure that Theresa May and her team deliver on that.
And you don't trust them?
I don't trust them yet, and I personally would rather see the repeal of the 1972 European Communities Act and leave now so that our Parliament sets the agenda.
So forget all the
EU.
trade treaties, just...
I think we've got people who want to trade with us now. We've got countries that want to trade now. Why can't we just get on with that? And I think there's a frustration within our party and within some people that voted leave that they want to see some action now. So whilst I appreciate, David Davis is in position, they've got work to do, I think a lot of our members would like to see it happening a little faster.
Now, your friend and colleague, Nigel Farage, is out there in America endorsing Donald Trump. Do you endorse Donald Trump?
I don't endorse Donald Trump. I don't endorse Hillary Clinton. I can understand why Nigel's gone out to America. He wanted to get involved in other political events, and he's been going over to America over many years. Personally, our party has not endorsed one single candidate, and nor should it. We weren't happy that Obama came over here and started telling people how they should vote in the referendum. Why should we tell others? So
what do you think of his lines on
made.
Muslims, though, of extreme vetting of Muslim immigrants, of closing the door to Muslim immigrants you can't vet?
I think that's far too harsh. As most people in UKIP now realise, I've put a positive vision forward for British Islam. We do need to understand that...
Positive? Are you sure it's positive?
Yes, I do.
You want to close Muslim schools, don't you?
I've got a lot of positives within the whole speech, and it's about fairness, it's about equality, it's about respect and integration. But what I think Donald Trump has done wrong is closing the door. I don't want to close any door to anyone. I want opportunities for all British Muslims.
When you say integration, is that why you want to ban the burqa in public places?
Never said ban the burqa at all. The vision is show your face in a public place.
That would mean no burqas, wouldn't it?
It also means no crash helmets, no hoodies,
no balaclavas, no scarves.
No, and it is about feeling safe and secure. You and I both know how each other are feeling at the moment because we can see our facial expressions. And I think that's very important moving forward, that our country feels safe.
And why do you want to only ban Muslim schools?
What we're looking at the moment in terms of the Muslim schools, and it is a short-term ban, once we realise and understand that Muslim schools aren't teaching our children that the word of the female is worth half that of a man, that homophobia is, or homosexuals shouldn't be in our country and that they should be illegal. It's about respect and it's about teaching a whole well-rounded...
But other religious schools teach all sorts of things, values that you may not agree with either, whether it's the Christian rights or
about the values.
Sikhs or Hindus or Jews or whoever.
Yeah, I think religion plays a huge part in all of our
So why do you want to
country.
single out Muslims?
Because we've got to think about where radicalisation comes from. Is it right that a school is teaching children that women aren't as important as men? I don't think that's right.
But do you think terrorism is coming from Muslim schools?
There has been some links, but I think we have to think... I think what we have to do is to look at the Muslim schools, and I have had an open letter from them inviting me to go to their schools, which I have accepted, and I would like to...
Which are the links you were just saying?
Sorry?
What are the links you were just saying, that there have been links to terrorism?
There are... some of the research that's been done has shown that radicalisation can start at a very early age when they're not being taught a well-rounded education and they're not teaching all values that we want to see in our schools. And I think that it's wrong to see books on shelves that talk about stoning and talk about the lack of respect for women, and I think that's wrong.
You don't like Sharia courts either, do you?
No.
What about Jewish courts?
Jewish courts at the moment, I haven't got an issue with the Jewish court.
What's the difference?
I think there's a very big difference. I think, in terms of the Sharia law, we have to ban Sharia law in this country. And the Sharia courts,
But what's the difference between
the word of a female,
Sharia settling divorce and a Jewish court settling a dispute?
Well, I don't feel it is right that the word of a female is only worth half that of a man in court. And that's not acceptable in this day and age. With the 21st century, my word should be exactly the same as yours. And I think that's the point I'm trying to make with this vision paper. But I'm also about a lot more for UKIP. I'm a very strong individual. I'm not afraid to stand up and be counted. I'm a big team player, and I've got a lot to offer this party moving forward.
We just had the story from France about burkinis,
Yes.
thinking about burqas.
Yeah.
When you look at that image of armed police telling a woman to take her clothes off, what do you think?
I think that is appalling. A burkini is just no different to you going onto the beach wearing a wetsuit. You know, some people, my father would be there with his jumper on, whatever the weather, so he would be wearing long-sleeve clothes. It doesn't cover the face. And for me, that's what I'm asking, is to show your face in a public place in areas of high security. Having someone come up to you on the beach to say, take that off, we don't like what you're wearing, that's not acceptable. But in terms of covering the face to make people feel more comfortable, that I don't have a problem with. But I certainly wouldn't expect armed police walking up to them and making people feel very, very insignificant.
Lisa Duffy, thank you very much indeed for coming in.
Thank you for your time.
Matt.
Well, Hillary Clinton had plenty of scathing words for Donald Trump too, accusing him of taking hate groups mainstream and promoting racist lie after racist lie. She claimed her Republican rival had brought extremism into the heart of American politics, embracing racist ideology, which she called the alt-right. Mr. Trump hit back, calling it a disgusting argument and a deliberate attempt to distract attention away from Mrs. Clinton's own controversies. Well, live now to our Washington correspondent, Kylie Morris. Kylie.
Well, Matt, suddenly this presidential contest is a slanging match over bigotry, over race, over corruption. I mean, here's the background to this moment, I think. Donald Trump has been trying to turn a corner. We've seen indications of a softening on his immigration policies, and for the past week or so he's pretty much managed to stay on message and read from the teleprompter. Hillary Clinton doesn't want that. She wants to put him very much in the orbit of those with more extreme ideologies. For that reason, she's accused him of giving a megaphone to hate groups, and she singled out the alt-right on the very fringe, giving suddenly the alt-right the attention they've craved for a very long time.
Secretary Hillary Rodham Clinton. Woo!
Even as the Democratic candidate walked onto the stage to link Donald Trump to the extreme right, the output from alt-right accounts online quivered in expectation. The time has come, read one. Say my name, the memes urged. Say it, Grandma, name us.
The names may have changed. Racists now call themselves racialists. White supremacists now call themselves white nationalists. The paranoid fringe now calls itself alt-right. But the hate burns just as bright.
She says the Trump campaign has lifted up a hate movement.
These are racist ideas, race-baiting ideas, anti-Muslim, anti-immigrant, anti-women.
And taken those ideas into the mainstream. Cause for celebration in the alt-right world. One key figure declaring their obscure movement had usurped the GOP. Another meme of the alt-right mascot, a frog called Pepe, emerging from inside the web. So who are the alt-right? Well, it depends on who you ask.
The screamers and the crazy people on the alt-right, as they call it, who love Donald Trump, they're not real political players. These are not people who matter in the overall course of humanity.
The alt-right, which is the sort of dressed-up-in-suits version of the neo-Nazi and white supremacist movements.
I would call myself a race realist, and that's based on the understanding that race is not some kind of social construct. It's a real biological phenomenon.
Jared Taylor is a white supremacist elder in the alt-right community, thrilled by Donald Trump's success.
Here we have a presidential candidate who is saying some of the things that some of us have been saying for 25 years. It's been easy to marginalize people on the margins, but it's difficult to marginalize the Republican candidate for president.
At an event in Cleveland last month, the younger, more tech-savvy element of the movement were among those who came out to play.
I think there's been this trend in the Republican Party towards globalism for the last 30 or 40 years, and people will say, oh, you're being a nativist or you're being, too nationalistic or a white supremacist. I think Trump is just unapologetically American.
The key speaker they gathered to hear was Milo Yiannopoulos, the alt-right poster boy who works for the Breitbart website.
I just got banned from Twitter.
Twitter banned him, charging that he incited online abuse of the African-American actress Leslie Jones.
The solution to online harassment is simple. Women should log off.
Headlines from the conservative Breitbart website feature in a new ad by the Democrats.
Would you rather your child had feminism or cancer?
Its editor, Steve Bannon, says the website provides a platform for alt-right ideas, but he's taken a career break for now. You can see him here advising Donald Trump at a meeting in Trump Tower. Just over a week ago, he became the Republican candidate's campaign CEO. The reality is that since then, Trump has attempted to soften his hard line on immigration, but it's already cost him support within his own party from people like Andrew Weinstein. After he disavowed Trump, Andrew became the target of online abuse from what he says is the alt-right. Remember Pepe the Frog, the alt-right mascot? Here he is putting Andrew, who's Jewish, into an oven. And here, well, you can see for yourself.
These people live in the shadows. They thrive on fear and threats. And I think the only way to purge them from our system is to step out and shine a bright light on them and expose them for what they are.
Donald Trump says he doesn't want white supremacists to vote for him and says Hillary Clinton is calling him racist because it's the oldest strategy in the Democratic playbook. But it's put him on the defensive at a time when he needs America to focus on her connections, not his.
What's been particularly interesting to observe since that speech by Hillary Clinton is how few of the kind of Republican grandees of the party have come out to push back against that speech and to give their support in a vocal way to Donald Trump. It's an indicator, I think, of the distance still between the establishment within the party and Donald Trump's campaign, and there's no sense of them rushing to his defence right now.
Kylie, thanks very much.
Now, drivers working for the Uber Eats delivery service have staged a protest over what they say is dwindling pay. Some self-employed staff claiming they risk not earning the minimum wage. Earlier this month, staff at another food delivery firm, Deliveroo, went on strike over a new payment model. So is this another casualty of what they're calling the gig economy? Asad Beg reports.
In a park in East London, angry delivery drivers gather for a modern protest. The tactics, posters and slogans are familiar. But the target is new, the gig economy, only made possible in the last few years through smartphone apps.
We get an order, it pings on the screen, we click it, order gets accepted.
Okay.
Then we have a pickup location for the restaurant, which we're not paid for, but we make our way to that restaurant. From onwards that point, starting the trip to the drop-off location, that's what we're paid for.
Then it's off to Uber's offices in Convoy. Drivers are paid £3.30 per delivery, plus £1 per mile, from which Uber Eats takes a 25% service charge. Until August 19th, they were paid an extra £5 per delivery throughout the day. Now, they only get extra during peak hours, £4 a delivery at lunch, £3 at dinner. Drivers say they have seen a huge drop in their wages, and that's why they're taking this protest to Uber's offices in South London. They are asking for the London living wage, but as technically they are self-employed, minimum wage legislation does not apply.
One of our brothers, he was there for about 10 hours, but he only went home with £9. Now, how is that fair on him?
Every day I log in at 11:30 and I stay logged in until 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock.
In the evening?
In the evening. As the job comes in, I go to it.
So you're doing what, 10 hours?
Full 10 hours. I'm logged in. I'm available to work for full 10 hours.
In 10 hours you made £34?
£34. As you can see, £34.
Uber Eats paid large sums and bonuses to recruit drivers from rivals when they began, but wages have dropped since. Parent company Uber is valued at over $60 billion, but made a $1.2 billion loss in the first half of this year, partly because of this tactic, aggressively subsidizing services to gain market share.
When they are able to do more deliveries per hour, they're able to make more in actual fares and less in incentives. So we restricted the incentives or reduced the incentives last week. Now, thankfully, since then, actually courier payouts are up 10% versus the previous week and well above the living wage.
These drivers are clearly upset though. We've seen some of their wages on the phone, and they've earned £34 in a day for 10 hours.
Sure, so I think on a one-to-one basis, we absolutely welcome couriers to come talk to us so we can help to understand why their earnings aren't kind of at the average level and ways that they can improve them. From our perspective,
as we're doing the interview, the protesters arrive. Okay, I think they've kind of figured out you're here. Are you going to be talking to them now?
I think we should probably clean up.
Shame on you! Hey, you want to know what's going on? Shame on you! Work, isn't it? Back to work!
The gig economy may be new, but it hasn't created a bright new future in industrial relations.
That's the big reporting. Now, after the break, we meet the ballerina so moved by the plight of refugees that she's now starring in a production of Carmen, inspired by the time that she spent in the camps. The tale of Carmen has been refashioned many times, but a new ballet takes a contemporary twist. Carmen has been recast as a refugee in a camp on the outskirts of Europe. Russian star ballerina Irina Kolesnikova plays the lead, inspired by her visit to refugee camps in Syria and Macedonia. Irina's life itself has not been easy either, growing up as a ballerina in the former Soviet Union. She's been accused of being the wrong body shape. I went to meet her at the London Coliseum, where Her Name is Carmen is currently playing. Irina Kolesnikova works her magic as Carmen on one of the most famous stages in London. But the grace of this Russian prima ballerina conceals the grit required by a grueling devotion to her art.
When I was 16 or 17,
a teenager,
teenager, I was bigger than other girls. And it was a problem for me and for my teacher.
You dieted all the time?
Yes.
That must have been really painful, constantly dieting.
It's not easy for me. It's for my family. It's a very hard work.
Did your teachers always tell you, you have to get thinner, get thinner, get thinner? Was there always pressure on you?
Yes, unfortunately, our arts needed skin body.
Skinny body.
Skinny body.
Her enlightened approach to ballet is reflected in this new reworked performance of Carmen with a very contemporary angle. To prepare for it, Irina travelled with Oxfam to refugee camps in Serbia and Macedonia.
At the time, every media told about refugee crisis, and we had idea to combine
Carmen with the refugee crisis.
Yes, love story and the contemporary problem.
So when you spent time in the refugee camps, what struck you most?
I saw many parentless children, and I understood about this problem, this big problem. It's separated families. I understand I can't help these people. I just can tell about this problem on stage.
Your own childhood in the Soviet Union wasn't easy, was it?
It was a very hard time for all families in Russia.
Yeah. It was the collapse of the Soviet Union, wasn't it? Yeah.
Yes. Our shops was empty, and for my mom it was very hard to
bring up a family.
Yes.
Yeah. And you all lived in one room at one stage, didn't you? All of you?
Yes, we had not a big flat, but I was a child, and for me it was normal.
In the refugee camps, one little girl travelling on her own struck Irina in particular. It is her story that is now told on stage. Do you know what's happened to some of the refugee families that you met in the camp?
I don't know. I just know about this girl After our visited, after 2 days, she was disappeared.
She disappeared?
She disappeared, and nobody tell me about where she is now. So
you have no idea where she is, whether she's in Turkey
I don't
or in
know.
Greece or in Germany?
No. It's very sad.
That must be really sad for you.
Yes, it's very sad. It's a terrible story.
So when you look at that girl, you think of your own daughter?
Maybe, yes.
The Russian government is involved in Syria. I mean, Russian airplanes are bombing Syrian targets. Does that make you think?
I'm not politicians, and I just ballerina.
Tonight's main news, rebel fighters and civilians have begun leaving the Syrian town of Daraya, effectively surrendering it to government control after a 4-year siege.
Well, thank you very much. We'll be back tomorrow at 20 to 7. That's all from Chris and me. Have a wonderful weekend.
That's Channel 4 News. Bye-bye.